Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. Tonight, I'd like to show you what the Poe Museum's collections look like in the dark. Yep, that's about it. Or how about I show you the Poe Museum's collections in the dark with the benefit of a blacklight. And that will be the subject of tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. Edgar Allan Poe once wrote, "Believe nothing that you hear and only half of what you see." And that's a quote that could very well apply to museums. A lot of your times you see a beautiful, pristine painting like this, you've got no idea what a rough life it's lived. Fortunately, by shining a black light on it, we can see some of the later editions. The older paint is going to fluoresce under black light, and there are corrections, additions, in-paintings that the conservators did, just filling in missing parts. Those are going to turn black. So let's take a look at our old buddy Rufus Griswold, Poe's diabolical, dastardly biographer, his worst enemy in the world. We got this painting back in 2016, and it was in rough shape. Thanks to about 6 months of conservation work by Scott Nolly, we finally got it in presentable condition. But let's see what story it has to tell in the dark. Oh, old Rufus is in pretty rough shape here. You can tell that there's been a lot of cracks that have had been filled in, a lot of overpainting, scratches and flaked off paint. But then look down here at this dark spot, almost entirely inpainted. And that's because when we got the painting, it used to have a hole in it with a nail sticking out right in the corner there. So Scott was able to fill that in, repair it, and now to the naked eye, you wouldn't know the difference. Compared to Rufus, his lovely wife Caroline is actually in pretty good condition. There's been a little bit of in-painting where paint is flecked off over the years, but overall, there's a lot of original paint there. You even have the little flecks of white paint that are highlights in her eyes. And you can see why one of the letters in our collection, Rufus Griswold said that every morning and every night he kissed the lips upon her portrait and imagined that her eyes were looking down kindly upon him. It almost looks like they're looking down on you right now. Let's take a look at some of the other paintings in the collection and see what else you might have missed. And that brings us to Edgar Allan Poe's foster parents, John and Frances Allan. We're lucky enough to have life portraits of both of his foster parents. In fact, this is one of 2 known portraits of John Allan, one of 2 known portraits of Frances Allan. So this is one you see in a lot of books. It's dated to around 1804, so about 5 years before Edgar was born. So this is probably what John Allan would have looked like when he first took in the little 2-year-old Edgar. It's attributed to Thomas Sully, the guy who did that portrait of Andrew Jackson that's on the $20 bill. I can't say the same for this painting. It's still a charming picture. It's not by Thomas Sully. It's attributed to his nephew, Robert Sully, who's one of Poe's friends, and he wasn't quite as talented as Thomas Sully. And it's always seemed a little bit off, and I've always just sort of attributed it to being by not such a great artist. The neck is a little bit swan-like. There's a few too many vertebrae in that neck there. But there's also something in the face. And we have 2 portraits of her that exist. One of them used to be in the Valentine Museum here in Richmond. And that's by Thomas Sully. So we can compare the Thomas with the Robert Sully. And there's something in particular wrong about the nose there. So let's take a look in the dark and see what's going on. Oh, there we go. We can see she's had a lot of overpainting and passages down here. There's a lot of missing paint. And we can compare this with photography that was done right before this painting was restored. So we know which places were completely overpainted. Like this eye here was completely redone, but at least the artist made an effort, a little bit of an effort to make sure it was fairly symmetrical with the other eye. I think she missed the mark just a little bit. But then when you get down to the nose, I think that's where the restorer's abilities are a little bit wanting. Check out here. We know that she was missing a huge part underneath the nose. And when she was filling in with inpainting to try to fill in what should have been there, she interpreted a little dark edge down here as being the edge of the nostril. So she extended this one nostril far too long, and it made the nose look kind of crooked. I think what that dark passage was, I think that that dark edge that she was trying to meet up with should not have been interpreted as the edge of the nostril. It was probably the edge of a shadow cast by the nose. The nostril should have been symmetrical with the original nostril on the other side, and she should have painted a shadow underneath the nose. So I think this is a pretty easy fix if we were to have a conservator take a look at this and remove some of the later overpainting and inpaint a little bit better. Unfortunately, we've got some other pieces that are at the conservator right now, and we have to take care of those before we can ever tackle something like this. And we'll show you that photograph and painting that are right now at the conservators when they get back, and you'll see how they did. This top painting here of John Allen, it's actually in fairly good condition. You can tell it has some scratches across the face, but aside from missing a little paint, there's a lot of original paint surface here. So this looks a lot like it would have when it left the artist's studio. And this portrait represents Jane Scott Mackenzie, the foster mother of Edgar Allan Poe's little sister Rosalie Mackenzie Poe. So Rosalie was about a year old when the kids were orphaned, and she grew up with Mrs. Mackenzie and lived with different Mackenzie relatives for most of her life. So this was a very important person, not only to Rosalie's life, but also to Edgar's life, because he hung out a lot of times at the Mackenzie house, was good friends with her sons. So let's hit the lights and see what it looks like under the black light. Oh yeah, she's had major restorations done. Look at all the in-painting that was done. They covered major areas. There's only a little bit of original paint showing through all this mess. So what on earth happened to Jane Mackenzie? Fortunately, we do have some old photos that showed what she looked like prior to the restoration hatchet job here. She was actually in pretty bad shape before. A lot of missing paint. The background, though, was a lot lighter. And one thing that you don't see is that she had hands down here. The hands show up in the old photographs, so they're still underneath there. But even after the painting was conserved and restored, that hand looks so bad. I think the conservator and the museum's curator at the time decided, why don't we just cover up the hand entirely so nobody has to look at it? So now we just see her sort of from the waist up, but that hand's missing. Here's a picture of John Allen's sister, Mary Allen. She lived in Irvine, Scotland, and Edgar, as a little kid, actually visited her when he was 6 years old. They went to Scotland and then to England on business, and Poe was living in her house. This is a face that he would have known. But do we know this face? Let's check it out in the black light. She looks good overall. There's some cracking in the face that had to be repaired. But right down here, there's a big blob. Something major was filled in right there. You'll never guess what it was. We have archival photos of this piece from when it first entered the museum's collection, and there was a big gaping hole right there. And that brings us to this fine portrait of Anne Charlotte Lynch, attributed to George Healey, a major 19th century American artist. And she hosted a weekly literary soiree at her home in New York City. Poe was on the guest list. He was one of the people that everyone came to see, came to meet. And it helped briefly make Poe a star in the New York literary scene until he got kicked out. But let's take a look and see how she's fared over the years. Let's hit the lights. Overall, she's in fairly good condition. It doesn't look like a whole lot of work has been done around the face here. Looks like the major work that's been done is right down here along the edge. So overall, I'd say she is in good shape. But it just goes to show you never can believe your eyes when it comes to old paintings in museums. Pretty much anything older than 80 years or so is going to have a pattern of cracks in it. And depending on the temperature and relative humidity in which a painting was housed, you never know what kind of damage it could have. I mean, we just showed you the Rufus Griswold painting that used to have a nail stuck through the front of it. But if you'd like to help us preserve precious Poe pieces, like this portrait of Anne Charlotte Lynch, or some of the other paintings in our collection, why not support our work or become a member at poemuseum.org. And until next time, thanks for joining us. And I'll leave you with more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats doing Poe Museum cat stuff.